Hello everyone, and welcome to this, my video on the Pentax K2 DMD, the top end of the Pentax K lineup. DMD stands for data, back, there's no B in there, but data, and motor drive. The Pentax K2 DMD is a 35mm interchangeable lens SLR. What that means is that it can take any 35mm film that you would like to put into it, and it has interchangeable lenses. So you can take different K-mount lenses and put them on the camera and take them off and swap them out at any time when you're not taking a photo without messing up your photos. It has a center-weighted light meter, and what that means is that an area in the center of the frame, about like the circle I'm drawing with my pencil here, accounts for the majority of the metering information. Typically with Pentax it was about 60%, and I didn't specifically find that or look for it really for this script, but that's probably about what it is, or pretty darn close to that. It has shutter speeds of 8 seconds to 1/1000th of a second right here, plus automatic with the blind in the cover being closed. That's what that little square is. It's automatic mode, and it blacks out the viewfinder. The viewfinder has 0.88x magnification and a 95% frame coverage. Now what that means is that what you see in the viewfinder is 88% of the size of what will be on the film, and 95% frame coverage means that if we assume that what you're looking at right now is what will be on your film negative, then you're going to lose about 2.5% on each of the sides and the top and the bottom, which means that if you completely fill your frame in your viewfinder with your subject and your photo, you still have a little bit of room to crop and adjust your negative in post. It has a fixed split prism focusing screen. The flash sync speed on this camera is 1/125th of a second, and it's marked there in orange as a reminder. And also these today, I mean, they're out there, you can find them obviously, but they're fairly uncommon cameras, and that uncommonality combined with their added capabilities above the Pentax K2 on which this camera is based make them a little bit spendier. They are, as I understand it, a little bit more rare with the motor drive, but really, motor drive, not a big deal, as we'll talk about in just a few moments. So the Pentax K2 DMD was a professional geared camera. It was aimed at the professional user. Kind of a flop in that regard, and we'll talk about why shortly, but it was designed for that market. And we know that because it's the top end K body. It took the highest end K body that they were making and then added some nifty other features to it. It's capable of using a data back and a motor drive. And the data back also, by the way, gives a ton of information. If you have one of those, you can get things like the date and the specific time the photo was taken. So not useful for very much except science, but neat. Also, the motor drive has a 2 frame per second speed, so that if you connect the motor drive to it, you can burn through 2 frames every second. It was made by the Asahi Optical Company in Japan from 1976 until 1980. It was preceded by the K2, which we know is because this was a version of the K2, and it was followed by nothing. The top-end M body was the MX, and that was based on the KX. The K2 DMD, there was nothing in any future catalog from Pentax that really had the same feature set or that was a direct successor to it. If you have your Pentax K2 DMD, we're going to go through what all of the stuff on it is, and in the second video we'll talk about how to use it. Technically on the front are the strap lugs where you can connect the camera strap. Film rewind knob and lever right here for rewinding your film. Serial number. Flash hot shoe so that you can connect a flash to your camera. This is the index for your shutter dial, which is right here, and this is your shutter dial. Shutter release button. Lock and unlock switch right here. Film advance lever. And if we lock the shutter, you'll see we can't take a picture, but if we unlock it, then we can. Frame count window. Oh, and this little silver button here is the automatic lock button. So if you're in automatic mode, you can't go back to a manually selected shutter speed without pushing that silver button down, and now you can go back to a manually selected shutter speed. On the front, we have the make and the model right here. We have the self-timer winder right here. This button is the depth of field preview button. This is the lens release button, and we'll see how to use this in videos too, or actually right now. This is the lens mount, lens mounting index. Then you can see these two little wings right around in here. These are your exposure compensation. This is your exposure compensation setting and your ISO setting dial. This is the ISO setting release button right here. Then here, this is your MLU button if you flip it up, or your auto exposure lock button when you push it down. So if you hold it down, you can lock the exposure, which is a nice upgrade from what the none of the other Pentax K bodies had that. Also on the front, we have this little window right here, and this is what you could, and when you mount a lens in the viewfinder, you have this window to give you a preview of what the aperture is that you're set to. On the side, we have the FP flash port. On the back of the camera, we have the X flash port. This is your battery check, and we'll check and see if I have good batteries in there. Nope, probably have not put batteries in it yet. But you push this button, and if this light lights up red, you have good batteries. Viewfinder, film memo holder. When you take your film out of the box that it comes in, you tear that top off, slide it in here, and then you know what kind of film you have. Electronic contacts for the data back. On the camera's bottom, we have the battery chamber, the tripod socket, the date writing window blind. This we'll see when we open the inside of the camera in just a moment. Film rewind button, motor drive mechanical coupling, motor drive electronic contacts, and more electronic contacts. To get into the camera, you lift up on the film rewind knob, and the back pops open. Film cassette chamber, silver film guide rails that help keep the film moving smoothly through the camera and flat, shutter, film tension sprocket, film take-up spool, film roller here, sandwiches or presses down on the film right here to help keep tension on it so that the sprocket engages the sprocket holes. This is your film pressure plate right there. And as I just told you, we were going to see that little blind. If we rotate this dial right here from off to on, a little blind pops up in the corner right there. So let's see that again. Let's see if I can do it without blocking the view. This is not easy to do and not block the view. Okay. There you can see it moving in and out. That's a little bit fiddly. And so when you take a picture with the data back, you want to record data, then what you do is you put this little notch out right there. And what happens is that the data back will then imprint a 3.8 millimeter diameter circle here. That circle is the clock that shows the time and the date that the photo was taken. And that blind gives you a little blank spot on the negative where you can have that data be recorded and also have it be a little bit easier to read. So that's why that's there. If you don't have the data back, just make sure that you switch that to off, and then you can record your full negative. Because it's at the bottom right corner of the window here, and because lenses invert and rotate images, that little circle is imprinted in the top left corner of your finished photo. So some tips for using the camera. I just mentioned one of them. Unless you have the data back, what you want to do is make sure that you have that blind in place. The motor drive for this camera uses the exact same motor drive hardware as the older motor drives on the Spotmatic series cameras. So different body, same motor, and that's why it's only 2 frames per second. And part of the problem with that, of course, was that even by the late 70s, Nikon and Canon and other, I think really just those two primarily, maybe Olympus, I'm not sure, had motor drives that had faster frame rates and were significantly smaller than this one was equipped with, and that made this as a motor drive camera kind of a flop, unfortunately. The data record back for this camera could record the date, the month, and the year, plus the hour, minute, and second at which the photo was taken. So it printed all of that in that little circle in that blind area that we talked about, and the data back for this and the motor drive can be used separately. So you can use one or the other. You don't have to use them both at the same time. The data back can also be turned off and on. So if you want to take a photo without the data imprint, then you can just turn it off. And realistically, the data back for this, I believe, is a fairly uncommon accessory because it wasn't really widely adopted. It provided too much information that most professionals didn't need, and it was really only useful with the amount of information provided for scientific documentation, possibly forensics, things like that. So, at any rate, some things not to do with this camera. You don't want to touch the mirror or the shutter. If you touch the mirror with your finger oils, it can cause the silver on the surface of the mirror to tarnish, which can result in the image in your viewfinder being dimmer, potentially even your light meter having an incorrect reading. If you touch the shutter, that's just a really good way to jam your shutter and ruin it and completely ruin your camera. Also, don't leave the camera with the shutter ready to fire when you're done for the day. Be sure to trigger the shutter rather, because there's a lot of mechanical springs and components in here that are under tension waiting for the shutter to be fired. And if they stay under that tension, it's a good way to stress them and cause them to fatigue and not have proper timing. Also, don't store this in a plastic bag or box, because that's a really good way for moisture to permeate that plastic and cause fungus and mildew to grow in your leather covering and on your optics. If you do keep it in like a hard plastic case, just be sure to have a rechargeable desiccant pack in there that you keep recharged. And also don't let this get wet. This camera predates weather sealing on professional grade cameras, so it's not weather sealed. You don't want water to get into it. Just remember that your Pentax K2 DMD is a precision tool that should be handled with care and respect. And as long as you take care of your camera will take care of you. So that's it for video 1. In video 2, we're going to go through all of the features on this camera and talk about how to use them to take photos.